What's up, family? Welcome to another episode of All Faith, No Fear, where we know that fear keeps you in bondage, but faith pushes you to your destiny. I am your host, Rodney Footman, here with a very special guest today. Her name is Erin. See, I told you I was going to mess it up. Is it
Harrigan.
Harrigan?
You
Like,
got it.
yeah, y'all, I'm sorry, but I don't know what happens. Like, I have it before the show, and then as soon as the show starts, my mind go blank. I don't know if that's the nervousness on the inside of me, but that's it. How are you doing today?
I am so great, Ronnie. It is such an honor to be here to talk about. I love what you just said about, fear holding you back and faith taking you to your destiny. So I'm excited to talk about that.
That's because and the reason for this podcast, just to give you a little bit backstory, is fear had held me so long in the chokehold.
Mm,
I've not done so many things because of fear.
mm,
Fear of responsibility, fear of how people were gonna look at me, fear
mm.
of failure. So it all coincides with my title. So like, because I had started a podcast before called Beyond the Surface. I did 5 episodes and I quit. I did 5 and I quit because I didn't get the engagement that I
Mm,
thought I should have got.
mm,
And so it was like,
mm.
it's a waste of time of me doing it. So here I am now actually doing it. And, uh, the part that really made me wanted to do it is God spoke to me one day and he was like, what are you fearful of? Because I always felt like if I messed up or something like that, people are going to throw me away.
Mm,
So the
mm.
one thing God told me was, like, who told you that I would throw you away?
Oh, yes.
Like, no matter what you do, no matter how many times you mess up, I would never throw you away.
That's right. Amen.
So yeah, that's kind of basically my story. So I know you have a podcast and called Redefining. So redefining the hustle. So tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So my story with fear was fear of letting go of control. I am the oldest of four to a single mom, grew up outside of Washington, D.C. We were in and out of poverty. And so I thought for my whole life, like money will save us, right? So I was grinding it out and driving and striving and chasing the achievement and knowing that I knew God, but I didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus.
Mm,
So that left me unstable. It left me sort of, swinging in the wind when other business opportunities came into my life and led me down a new age sort of universe path for a while. But I always had to be in control. And my fear was, well, if I don't do this, if I don't go make it happen, if it is to be, it's up to me. How will it get done? I will be a failure. I won't have the recognition, the approval, all the things. And where redefining hustle comes from for me is that the world has taken the word hustle and it has given it every negative, um, anxious, frantic definition. And we
very
as
true.
believers, we want to do God's work, but we don't want to do it. He didn't make us to do it the way the world works. So the idea of
Mm,
redefining hustle means how do we work and emulate Jesus in our work? And to do that, we've got to put aside the fears of what people say. We've got to put aside the fears of, being out of control and letting God lead us.
it's one thing that you said that we don't do the things the way the world does it. And I
Yeah,
feel like so many people of Christian faith nowadays, like they are trying to do things the way the world is doing it. And we are not intended to go by the world systems. We are
that is
intended to
right.
go by what God put in his word and
That is
what
right.
he said for us to do. And so I feel like a lot of times that's where a lot of things get misconstrued because we want world success, but we
That's
don't want
right.
God's success.
Yes, yes, Ronnie, you hit that nail on the head because the world tells us what success should look like. But the problem is, those are ever shifting sands. The measurements move, the goal line moves. The expectations change. And while we know the word tells us that we are in the world, but not of the world,
Well,
right? The problem is that noise about success is so loud, it's so entrenched in us that we can't always see the difference. And so then what happens is, and I love you shared the story of quitting that first podcast because we don't see the results we think we should see. We don't have the engagement we think we should have. And all of that is worldly measurement. Yes, there is
mm,
math. Yes, there are income measures. But if that is what we're tying our identity to, when those measures change, just like with your podcast, right? Then we won't move forward in what God has called us to do. We'll shrink back from it. We won't get moving in progress to that destiny because the fear holds us back because the definition is always changing.
mm.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. The definition is always changing and your appetite changes because once you hit
Mm,
that one goal, you gonna want it. You gonna try to
that's
reach
right.
another goal. I've heard a lot of successful people say that once they hit where they was at, it's like
Now what?
now what? What's the next thing? Because they don't have that sense of, I could say, God. They don't have that
That's right.
sense of God in their life. So that
Yeah.
even though they've reached that goal, it's still a void on the inside of
Yes.
them that they gotta fill with God, and only God can fill that void.
That is so true, Rodney. And that is really how I came to Jesus 9 years ago. I was
Mm,
46. I had had success. I had all the outward measure of success from my corporate job to my business. Like everything looked successful on the outside. But
mm,
when I woke up and realized that that hole, like you're talking about, I didn't know that it was a Jesus shaped hole. I just kept trying to put everything into it, my achievements, my accolades, being on stage, all of that. And when I hit that wall and talked to a mentor, she said to me, "You don't know who you are or whose you are. And Jesus did not, you were not made to work this way. Like you're carrying all of this burden and Jesus, his load is light, right? And so
mm,
that's exactly what happens. I was unfulfilled because I kept trying to fill my cup with all of the worldly success. And yet, when I had the worldly success, I was more lost than ever. There is nothing wrong with success. I just want to be clear. There's nothing wrong with making the money. It's the pedestal that we put it on, it's the idol that we make it. And we can never feel fully fulfilled without the Lord. He made us that way.
mm. Very true. If you could like speak on, because you were saying like you had all the success, but you still had a hole in you. Could you like speak on how did your life change once
Mm.
you allowed Jesus to come into your heart? How did everything shift for you?
Yeah. Well, obviously, we know that we are a new creation when we accept Christ. God's truth tells us that. What began to change most immediately was two things. One is I suddenly had this unsatiable hunger to read the Bible and to learn
Mm,
God's character, right? I wasn't going into it to memorize everything. Up until that point, like I had memorized scripture, but had completely taken it out of context, right? Like seek, ask and you'll be given everything. Well, that's not what it means, right? It's to ask in his will. So the first thing that changes, I wanted to be just surrounded by the word. The second thing that changed is I began to understand that God intended faithful work and faithful rest. See, I'm a doer and I need to be going. Hustle
mm,
fuels my adrenaline. So at the beginning of my kingdom walk, I began to see that, God's definition of success was different. It was about obedience, it was about relationship. But when that happened, Rodney, and I started to talk about it to people, especially in my business, people really, they were like throwing shade and giving me side eye because they were like, what are
this
you
ain't the
talking
same
about?
person. Yeah, this ain't the
Right.
same person.
Like I miss the old you, right? But I'm no
Mm,
longer that. Those were some of the immediate changes, but I think the painful changes were things like him showing me where I was prideful and that I was idolizing money and achievement and titles and success. Him peeling back the layers of where I was coveting other people's success and wanting more and more and more, but never being content, right? With where I was, and content that he had a hold of me. And it took a long, I mean, I'm still fighting those battles, but those were some of the immediate things that I experienced.
And I like how you said that you're still fighting some of those battles.
Oh
That
yeah.
I mean, that just lets people know, because I think a lot of people have a facade that when you come to Christ, that like all of your problems are gonna stop, all of
Right.
your things are gonna go away. But that's actually when the journey begins with
Mm,
yourself,
so
because
good. Yeah.
as you said, like God began to show you and the things, and a lot of times we don't want God to show us
Mm.
ourselves because we are fearful of what we might look like.
That is so true. And what I love and is very uncomfortable about walking a life with Jesus is that just when you think he's peeled all the layers,
Mm.
there's a deeper layer, right? I mean, I mean, honestly, it was just earlier this year that I realized that for the majority of my life that I had thought that money was my savior, because growing up without, it just seemed to me that
Mm.
money would solve everything. Well, then I had money, but it didn't solve everything, right? So he peels back these layers, but he's so gracious to do it in a gentle way where it's not all coming out at once, right? Like he shows you yourself and you're like, okay, I'll work through that. And then he's like, oh, but wait, now let's go deeper, right?
Man, I'm telling you, sometimes I'll be like, am I ever gonna be clean? Come on,
Right.
God. Now,
Come
this is
on.
did I deal, but the thing I love about it is when he shows you, it's like you never even knew you was
Mm,
dealing with that
mm.
problem,
That's
or you
right.
never even knew, like, from childhood, like how
Yeah.
your childhood plays a part in what you in now. And it's like,
Right.
oh wow, I didn't even know
Right.
any of this. So
Yes.
it's scary. I ain't gonna say it's scary, but it's like I gotta face myself, because in order
You
to
do.
grow,
That's
in
right.
order to be better, that's the only way it's gonna happen. Or
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
gonna stay in the same cycle.
And it's a different kind of fear. Like we were talking about fear earlier. It's the fear of like, what is he going to uncover next? Or, ooh, don't go
Mm.
there, Lord, because like you said earlier, like people will leave me behind. Like, Lord, will, you'll just leave me behind, right? Um, and we want him to not go to those certain places. Or when he brings something up and we're like, really? I have to deal with that?
Mm.
There's that fear of like, am I so marred that he won't want me, but yet he always does. And then the fear of, well, what happens if I get rid of all of that? Like, who am I? Because I've known myself to be this for all this time.
And I feel that the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Like that's what that is. And I mean, that's in every aspect of life, even when it comes to like business,
Yeah.
relationships, anything. Like the fear of the unknown and
Yeah.
following him is like, okay, God, like,
Right.
like,
Totally.
okay, I'm following you, but I need something to let me know that I'm on the right track. Like,
That's right.
let me know. But it's so good, especially with your podcast, like redefining the hustle, because and another thing you said was like, I'm trying to think with the word, how you're hunger for the
Mm,
word.
mm,
uh so my question is like, how did you not allow your hunger for the word to become like arrogant? Because
mm.
sometimes people get so full of the word but still don't have that connection with God, have that relationship with
Oh
God.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that was certainly me in my before Christ life, right? Like I was saying earlier, taking scripture totally out of context.
Mm.
Um, how did I not? It's interesting because I think my thirst was such that I wanted to learn and I wanted to read so much, but I also remember praying like, Lord, don't let me take this out of your context. Like, help me understand what this actually means. And I was really fortunate because around that same time, I had gotten involved in my local church and I had attended a couple of Bible study classes, not just like Bible studies, not just devotionals, but like, let's dig into what does this mean in the New Testament. And I took a class called, I know this sounds crazy, but it was like 30 days to reading the Bible, which you're not really, you're not reading. But what
Of
was so
course.
beautiful about it was how it connected the dots and how this story in the Old Testament connected to this story in the New Testament.
Mm,
And so I think because I had those classes and I was surrounded with people who very humbly did know the Bible inside and out, I wasn't afraid to ask them questions, and there was no question off limits. And so I think that kept me just very humble in wanting to know more, and then very careful to not then, take all of that out of context.
very true. And something you just said, and I want you to speak on that. Like, could you let people know, the viewers and the listeners know, how important it is to have a community
Oh yeah.
of people? Like you said, you was able to ask questions. No question was off limits. No one
Right.
judged you for your questions. You was a newcomer, and you was able to ask the questions that you needed to ask for
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, it's critically important. I know that first of all, I want to acknowledge that I know that some people do have church hurt, right? Maybe they were raised in a church in a certain way, or, I was raised Catholic. And when my parents divorced when I was 11, we were basically kicked out of the Catholic Church because divorce, right?
Mm,
So we lost that community. And I can understand how things like that and even worse things create church hurt. But if we can remember, that community, like God placed it, made us to be in community. We were never meant to walk out the Christian life alone,
very
ever.
true.
It doesn't matter if that community is two people or two or more gathered, he's there, or if it's bigger than that. But it's so important to find that community. And what I would encourage listeners to do, if they're not involved in church, well, even if they are involved in church, get to know a few people that you could build a relationship with, and even go to someone that you admire, that you feel like really is a true lover of Jesus and seems to know the word in a way that you would aspire to. Ask them to be your spiritual mentor through that, right? Because yes, we can walk this walk with the Lord, and that's great. And he made us to walk in community. So often the women that I work with through my coaching, they have a faith community, but those people don't understand business. And they have a business community, but those people don't understand how they're walking in their faith. And so finding a space where, for those who are in business, can intersect and integrate those
Mm,
two things is so critical. But you really want to have a place where you can go and ask the questions. And here's the thing is, like, if you are involved in a church where you're not able to do that, I would really encourage you to pray that the Lord would show you
where
where
you need to
you
go.
could find those people.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I might be pushing the toe when
Mhm.
I ask this one. Do you really believe it's church hurt or it's people hurt?
Well, that was the other thing that I was going to say. I have this saying that is, if you want instant chaos, add a human. Like, wherever you go, just
Very
add a
true.
human and there's the
Very true.
chaos. So yes, what happens in those walls is the human perspective. It's not God that hurt. It's not Jesus. It's not Holy Spirit. It's the human beings, right? And there will be chaos anywhere that there are human beings because we live in a fallen world.
Mm,
So I do believe that many times people are hurt emotionally, physically, traumatically by people, and then they hold that against God, and then therefore they write off being in the four walls of a church. But remember that in the word, the church isn't a building. It's people,
yeah,
and it's in here, right?
yeah. And that's one thing I dislike, is when people say church hurt, and
I agree.
they
Yeah, that's a good point.
they like disregard all of church.
Yeah,
And it's like, you haven't actually met. It's almost like you being racist because you
right.
disregarding a
Yeah,
whole community of
oh,
people, when
that's right.
everybody is not like that. It's just you had an experience with
That's
one person or a group of people that treated you that way, but that does not mean you should neglect the whole community of church. And
right.
that's one of
Absolutely.
that's one of the things I try to tell, like, even some
Yeah.
of my friends and family. Like, I understand what you went through as a child, but you can't keep holding on to that, because
No.
the more you hold on to it, the more,
That's right.
you're not going to get to where you need to be. Like
Right.
and to me, that's another form of fear of
Mm.
letting that go,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you don't want to progress.
That's right. That's right. And I thank you for bringing that up, because that kind of helps me think about it differently too. That again, it's not the church, it's the people. And it reminds me of when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. He said to Lazarus to rise and come out. And then he told everyone to take off those grave clothes, because he
Mm,
was stepping out of those old clothes, which of course, same thing when we become a new creation. And I think it's the same thing when people feel that in the church. I mean, we've had some upheaval at our church, and have had people leave and go to a different church. And I think that sometimes that has to happen, right? Like
yeah,
sometimes you've got
yeah,
to find that church home. But don't give up on the Lord in that space, because here's the thing is we're all imperfect.
very
Just
true,
because they're standing on the pulpit doesn't mean they're perfect. They're still human beings.
very true,
Yeah.
very true. And I feel like people put the person behind the pulpit on a pedestal, and
Yes.
they end up making them their idol.
Yes.
Instead of looking at the preacher, you should be looking at God. Don't get me wrong,
Amen.
the preacher is supposed to have a model life for you to follow, but at the end of the day, he's a man just like
That's
us,
right.
and
That's
he's
right.
flawed, and he got his own things that he got to deal with, he or she has to deal with.
That's right.
So it's like you gotta, it's a thin line. It's a very thin line when it comes to that. And a lot of people don't know how to draw that thin line
Mhm.
sometimes.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think that we as a world could do a much better job of understanding that, because we do put people on pedestals, and it's just like idolizing anything else, right? You shall have no idols before me.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
true. No
Yeah.
idols before you. And man, and especially the world we live in with
Mm.
social media and
Yes.
everything that's going on, it's so easy to create an idol, and you don't even know you've
That's right.
created an idol.
That's
Like
right.
I used to say, for me, the first thing I used to do when I used to wake up was check my phone, go to
Yep.
social media,
Yes.
Facebook, Instagram, all those type of things. And like the Lord spoke to me, he was like, how you put social media
Mm.
before me?
Right. Right. And we're like, "Oh, Lord, you just called me out." Yes. Yes, you did. So
Very
true.
true. Quick. And don't care. Don't care about calling. Don't care about no hurt feelings. I'll be like, God, that hurt my feelings. Oh well, it's gonna make you better.
That's right. You are hurting my feelings because you're putting social media ahead of me, right?
Yeah, and what I've been, and like the Bible says, he's a jealous God. He's the only God that is jealous.
That's right.
The only one. And if y'all don't, just quote me on this, you could go and look. Every
Yeah.
other God does not mind you sharing with other gods, but
Right.
our God is
Yes.
jealous of us because we belong to him.
Ooh, that is such a good point. Mm.
And I'm happy to belong to him, because
Yes.
he's looked out for me so many times,
Amen. Amen.
so many times. And sometimes I reflect back and I be like, man,
Yep.
I'm like, God, like I was a mess.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, like, when I look back, up on my whiteboard in my office, I have a card, and it's all the things that he's delivered me through since
Mhm.
I was saved. And it's some of it's really big stuff, like saving our marriage, and, us going through Financial Peace University, and that sort of thing. And sometimes it's a little stuff, but when I look at all of it, I'm just like, "And yet you keep doing it, Lord." Like, how would I not glorify you? Like, come
Mhm.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I, and that's what gets me even about church, going into church services, and people come in and think like God owed them something. I'm like, as much as
Right.
he has done. I mean,
That's right.
just you being, alive is
Yes.
enough. It's just
Amen.
enough. Just for
That's
you to be woken up is enough, because we
yeah,
don't wake ourselves up. He wakes us up.
that
You
is
think
right.
you think your alarm clock wakes you up, but
Mhm.
it's him that wakes
Mm,
you up. And like
mm.
for that, he deserves all the glory
That is
and
right.
all of the praise.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so when it comes to your podcast, how was it started? How did the idea come up, and like what made you go forth in your podcast?
So I was working on with a coach in 2018, and she was helping me get all of these ideas and this content, etc. Really, all of the message God had given me. I knew I needed to get it out there, but I was like, I don't even know how, like what format and all of these things. So she was helping me do that. And in the fall of 2018, she said, "You need to do a podcast." Now, I was always a fan of podcasting because in my multi-level marketing company, they had always taught us like your car is your rolling university.
Mm.
Use that time that you're in the car to learn, right? So I had been listening to podcasts. And when she said that, I thought, one, no. And two, then two, I thought, well, but I love podcasts and I have learned a lot from a 20-minute podcast or a 30, whatever.
Very true.
So when I started my podcast, it launched in February 2019. It launched from my laptop with, my earbuds. I had no microphone. I had like no nothing. And God said, just go. Like just go start sharing this message. And
Mm.
at the time, it what he had given me to talk about was called Hustle with Heart. And heart stood for helping entrepreneurs align results to God's truth. So my podcast was
Mm.
the Hustle with Heart podcast. And it was all topics about what does it look like to do business God's way and how does he define it and all of those pieces. And she said, I just want you to do a weekly show. Just do a weekly show. And like lo and behold, almost 5 years later, right?
Wow.
So last fall, I changed the topic, or I changed the podcast to Redefining Hustle, Pursuing Success as a Christian Woman, because what I was finding is so many of the conversations I was having with high achieving women was I love the hustle. I love the pace. I want to be going. I want to be doing, but how can I do that from a place of calm and joy and peace? And the only way to do
Mm.
that is to do it with the Lord. So, yeah, it started just so simply. I know nothing about technology. That is not my zone of genius. So I was like editing in GarageBand, and I'm sure it sounded, I don't know. Sometimes I go back and listen and I'm like, woo. But that was 2018. In 2020, he connected me. So I published a book in 2020 called Pursuing Success God's Way. And
Okay.
he connected me with a guy who did audio editing. And I started working with him on a potential audiobook. And then I said, "Do you edit podcasts?" And he's like, "Yeah." So that kind of changed things. And then he would tell me like, "Okay, go get this microphone. It's really good. It's not very expensive. So it's been a total learning process. Like when I don't even I say I host a podcast. I don't really say I'm a podcaster because I don't know. I just feel like that's so technical and I don't know any of that stuff. I just record. That's
True.
that's what I do.
True.
So it has been such a joy because I I love when people say to me like, "I only had 20 minutes today and I listened to your podcast and here's the impact," or, "Oh, I heard
Mm.
you say this and that reminded me of this," or, "I learned so much." And it's just one way that God gave me to get this message out there, and I have a lot of fun doing it.
Mm. And that's powerful because I can honestly say on my journey right now with podcasting, it's a lot of fun
Yeah.
to talk to people, get different people's
Right.
perspective. Like me and you have never talked
Right.
before this moment, but
Right.
like the connection just
Yeah.
because is good because I know this is a God connection as
That's right.
well too. And so like, my journey, like you said, you started with a laptop. I'm on my phone.
Right.
I'm on my phone with
Right.
a microphone that I bought. And so like I'm just here and hopefully, no,
Right.
it's not hopefully, but I am gonna make it to them 4 or 5 year marks
That's
that
right.
you already have been through.
Yeah.
So I heard you talk about business and your book. So
Mhm.
what does that look like when you talk to people in business, like giving them like the business principle, but giving them God principles too, like
Yeah.
intermingling with that?
I always feel like my story would be simply said as, ambitious woman got lost on her way to the top, found Jesus. He said, "Let me drive, hold this map," which is the Bible. And then after much pruning, he said, "Now go teach this to my ambitious daughters." So for
Mm.
me, what it looks like is really applying biblical truth to business. How do we serve? How do we work with intention and purpose? How do we deal with rejection? How are we
Mm.
resilient, right? How do we trust Jesus even in the down times? How do we not get so caught up in the measurement of success, but be obedient to the assignment he's given us, even when we're not seeing the engagement or the followers or whatever that is?
Mm.
So mostly I work with high achieving women in business. They've been in business for a few years. They've had success. They probably have a six-figure revenue business. That doesn't mean they're paying themselves that. I just want to be clear, because everybody's shooting for that. Like, I'm shooting for that 10K month. And I'm like, but how much of that are you actually paying yourself? Right.
Mm.
And I get into conversations with them because they'll say things like I experience, I have all this outward success, but I'm so unfulfilled. What I'm doing, I've been doing for so long, and I know I can't keep up this pace. How do I scale and refine my business in a way that honors God, but is a thriving business and serves the kingdom, right? So I have those conversations a lot. That's the position that I coach from, and I help them with strategy and accountability and focus. My book was born actually out of the podcast. So the same coach that I was working with on the podcast said, "Okay, now you need to write a book." And I thought, I am what? But she said, "You have 9 months of content. This was early on in my podcast. She's like, you've been podcasting for 9 months. You have the book. It's already there." And
Wow.
she was right. And so I took that content and of course had it transcribed and worked with an editor and all those pieces. And I self-published it. And it was for me, I wanted to tell my story, but more importantly, I wanted to give a roadmap to women like me. Like, how do I
Mm.
actually do this? Like, what do you mean when you say redefine hustle? What do you mean when you say hustle with heart? What do you mean when you say surrender over self-reliance? Like, what does that look like practically day to day? Tell me what my mode of operation is, right?
Sure.
Because there's at the time I didn't see an intersection of faith and business being talked about. Now, of course, I see it everywhere because now I've connected with people who do it, but there's just not a lot of talk about that. And so
True.
what I think happens, Rodney, is that we don't integrate our faith in our business, and we keep them separate like church and state. Like, this is my family and my church life, and this is my business. And therefore,
Mm.
by not allowing or not bringing our faith into it, we're constantly working the world's way. So that's really where it came from, was my own journey, and this instruction from him to go help his ambitious daughters, because whatever assignment he gives us, whether it's business, ministry, doing your podcast, whatever, we, like we talked about earlier, community, we need mentors, we need guidance. We need people who have walked that path. Like I like to say, like they've been there, done that, and they have the t-shirt and it's like dirty and stained, right?
Sure.
Because they've experienced so much. And I just was constantly having conversations with these women who were like, there's just something about you that's like so calming and peaceful, but yet you're in business. Like, how does that work? Yeah.
Yeah, they were. I guess they had a picture of you being chaotic a lot when it comes to.
Yeah. And that is 100% who I was before.
Wow.
100% before Christ.
Wow. Well, that is good. Again, I thank you for
Thank you.
being on the show. If you could just let the people know, like, where they could purchase your book, your program, and how to get in contact with you.
Yeah, for sure. The best place for everyone to go is erinharrigan.com. And you can download my free 4 keys to redefine hustle tool. You can learn about who I am and how much I love tacos. You can can get the book, you can listen to the podcast, learn how to work with me, all the things. That's the best place to go. From a business perspective, I hang out a lot on LinkedIn as Erin Harrigan. And then I am also on Instagram as Erin D, as in David Harrigan. And yeah, I would love to hear from anybody who's listened to this. If there's anything that I can pray over for you, or, however this brought you value and graced and blessed you today, just please reach out and let me know.
And again, she said reach out for the podcast. Please like, share, and tag this podcast.
Yes.
Subscribe to the channel. As she said, leave any comments that you got value from. Leave those comments on the bottom. Let us know what you liked about the show, what you disliked about the show. Yes. I'm always in for constructive criticism. So yes. Again, just like, share, and tag, leave those comments, subscribe to the channel, follow the Instagram page. I gotta stop saying I'm getting better at that though.
Listen, God is using you. God is using you powerfully. He gave words to Moses. He'll give you words.
Very true. But again, I thank each and every visitor, not visitor, but listener and viewer for tuning into this episode. And always remember that faith keeps you in bondage, but fear pushes you to your destinies. Y'all have a good one.